Welcome to The Eye Opener. I'm your host, Michael Lewis. The push for mail-in voting has to be a one-year experiment. A good government legal group found nearly 15 million mail-in ballots unaccounted for in the 2020 election. The withdrawal from Afghanistan is a failure. Now, the evacuation process will drag on, but even before the drawdown, the 20-year war was never a success for Americans. Why couldn't America win the Afghanistan war? Do we really know what's going on the far side of the world? Today, we will dive deep into this issue. Okay, my friends, let's take a closer look at this week's highlights together. First, we have an update on election integrity. PLIF is an Indianapolis-based public interest law firm dedicated to election integrity. The group assists states and others in fighting lawlessness in American elections. In a research brief published in August, PLIF found nearly 15 million mail-in ballots went unaccounted for in the 2020 election. The whereabouts for these ballots were deemed unknown by election officials. To gather the data, the Election Assistance Commission asked local officials how many ballots were not returned as voted, were undeliverable, or were otherwise unable to be tracked. The unknown ballots are ones election officials simply do not know what happened to them. They are the greatest blind spot in the American electoral system. In the 2020 election, besides the 15 million unknown, there were over 1 million undeliverable ballots and over 500,000 rejected ballots. To give you a sense how significant these numbers are, consider the undeliverable case. Joe Biden led Arizona by a little over 10,000 votes, yet Maricopa County alone reportedly sent ballots to over 110,000 outdated or wrong addresses. The same scenario was roughly repeated in Nevada. Biden won by over 33,000 votes, and Clark County had over 93,000 undeliverables. The report concludes, the lesson is clear. Increased reliance on mass mail voting must correlate with aggressive voter registration list maintenance. The astonishing part is, California alone, according to the PLIF report, had at least 3.5 million unknown absentee ballots. The total number must be greater since only listed the highest 10 counties. Los Angeles County had about 1.5 million such ballots, and Clark County in Nevada had more than 700,000. The report says, in the face of a pandemic, states from across the nation hastily pushed traditional in-person voters to mail ballots while, at the same time, trying to learn how to administer such a scenario. One consequence of this is the massive loss of ballots. Former DOJ civil rights attorney, now president of the group J. Christian Adams, said, the 2020 push for mail voting needs to be a one-year experiment. Some of the counties with the least experience in administering mail voting rejected the most ballots nationwide. If continued, 2020-style chaos will become the norm. The 110,000 undeliverable ballots found in Maricopa County again confirmed the need to review a 2020 election. So what has the Arizona audit been up to? Senate Liaison Ken Bennett revised the due date of the preliminary report from this week to Monday, August 23rd. The report will be delivered to the Senate Audit Leadership Team late Monday for review. Senate President Karen Fann, Senate Judiciary Chairman Warren Peterson, Liaison Ken Bennett, and Deputy Liaison Randy Pullen make up the team. The review and revision process is expected to last approximately 2 weeks. At the end of the process, a final report will be submitted and approved by the Senate for public dissemination. Other work in the pipeline for the audit, but not a part of this report, are signature verification on envelopes and additional canvassing. The whole world has been watching the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban this week. The Biden administration said the U.S. intelligence anticipated the fall, but it didn't anticipate the speed or timing. However, the Taliban started working on its comeback well before August. Let's first look at what happened over the last several months. On April 14th, the Biden administration announced it supported the previous administration's goal to withdraw troops from Afghanistan. The process was to begin on May 1st and end by September 11th. In May, as the United States and NATO pulled their soldiers out, the Taliban launched a major offensive in the southern province of Helmand. Following this attack, it moved in on 6 other provinces. During the month of June, attacks ranged in 26 of Afghanistan's 34 provinces. By June 22nd, the Taliban had extended its presence to the northern part of the country. On July 2nd, U.S. troops left Bagram Air Base, the largest U.S. military base in the country, and handed it off to the Afghan forces. 3 days later, the Taliban announced it would present the government with a peace deal around August. Soon, Biden moved up the withdrawal deadline to August 31st, 2 weeks ahead of the initial plan. When asked by a reporter if the Taliban takeover was inevitable, Biden denied it. He praised the U.S.-trained Afghan army as well-equipped as any army in the world. However, at the same time, the Taliban launched lightning attacks across the country. The Afghan army barely fought. The U.S. ramped up airstrikes to cover the embattled government forces, but they proved to be ineffective. By July 21st, the Taliban controlled half of the country's districts. From there, the situation rapidly deteriorated. On August 6th, the Taliban captured its first provincial capital in the southwest. Other major cities fell within days. By Friday, August 13th, most of the north, west, and south of Afghanistan had been taken over. If you look at the map, you could count the days to the fall of Kabul, the capital. But the perplexing part was Pentagon spokesman John Kirby claimed on that day that the Taliban did not pose an imminent threat to Kabul. Rather, it was trying to isolate the capital city.
The situation now, is Kabul under threat? Is Kabul isolated? What is it?
Right now, without getting into a battlefield assessment every day, I don't want to do that. Kabul is not right now in an imminent threat environment.
On Saturday, President Ashraf Ghani, in a televised address, said rapid consultations were underway and called for a revitalization of the armed forces. But that was probably not what was in his mind. The dramatic day came on Sunday, August 15th. Knowing the enemy was undefeatable, Ghani fled the country. The Taliban entered Kabul virtually unopposed and occupied the presidential palace. We all know the rest of the story. U.S. Army helicopters evacuated the remaining staff from the roof of the embassy in Kabul. The very scene reminds people of the iconic image of the fall of Saigon in 1975, shortly before the communists took over South Vietnam. Since last weekend, the U.S. has deployed thousands of troops to assist with the evacuation. But military assistance is limited to Kabul International Airport. Americans and Afghan allies scattered around the country are still on their own to make their way through Taliban checkpoints to board flights. We have been covering the aftermath of the Taliban takeover this week. We won't repeat the details or criticisms of the largely failed withdrawal plan again. However, the execution of the evacuation is well behind schedule. To date, U.S. troops have only airlifted 9,000 evacuees. On Thursday, some 2,000 people were flown out. Over 300 of them were Americans. This is far less than the 5,000 to 9,000 per day the Pentagon sent as the goal. During an interview with ABC News, Biden said there could be as many as 15,000 Americans stuck in Afghanistan. At the current pace, an August 31st target is certainly not achievable. One quick way to get all Americans out would be military intervention right across the country, which means sending troops and forces back to Afghanistan. But that might be the last option the Biden administration would take. It has always wanted a swift and peaceful departure to end the 20-year war. The withdrawal of America's presence may have triggered the downfall, but it was far from the real cause. Before the withdrawal, America hadn't actually won the Afghan war, but they didn't lose it in the traditional sense either. Dominic Tierney is a political scientist and associate professor who studies America in warfare. He has written several books, including The Right Way to Lose a War, America in an Age of Unwinnable Conflicts. In his view, the United States didn't lose the war in Afghanistan in the sense that the U.S. was defeated and occupied. It lost the war in the sense that it cost them an extraordinary amount. More than 2,000 Americans died and 20,000 injured. The total monetary cost of war since 2001 is about $2.3 trillion. And after 20 years, the Taliban returned to power. But Tierney points out the 20-year war is part of a bigger story in American military history that goes back to World War II. Before World War II, the United States had won nearly all major wars that it fought. But after that, everything drastically changed. Korea was a real tough stalemate. The Vietnam War was America's most infamous defeat. The Gulf War in 1991 might be an exception, but it was an arguable success. And Iraq was another major failure. So why was it that America, with the most advanced military forces in the world, couldn't win wars? There are many reasons, and Tierney said the most important one is, after World War II, the nature of war itself changed. It started seeing fewer classic conventional wars between countries. Nearly all wars now are civil wars, compounded by counterinsurgency and terrorism. Tierney said, when you put America in a conflict where soldiers wear uniforms and meet on the battlefield, we usually win those types of wars. The 1991 Gulf War was an example. But America really struggles in complex civil wars. In some fundamental way, World War II is what America thinks war should look like. There is a fairly clear enemy, we make progress on the battlefield, and it ends with a surrender ceremony. But that's not what war looks like anymore. Tierney said even today we spend money on F-35 fighter jets, fancy new ships, and high-tech hardware. Most are designed for war that just doesn't really happen anymore. It reminds me that today America is even facing information warfare and the unrestricted warfare by the Chinese Communist Party with intellectual property theft, cyber attacks, and infiltration to all aspects of society. America really should think outside the box and get ready for these alternative forms of war. Tierney's comment really applies here. He said, the U.S. military can destroy anything that it can see, but what if it can't see the enemy? Then it starts having problems. Back to the discussion of the war in Afghanistan. It also serves as an example that the wars America gets involved in today often happen on the far side of the world, in countries which Americans know almost nothing about. As time passes in these conflicts, the U.S. faces a tricky situation. The enemy is more committed to the struggle than America. To the United States, the conflict is just one of the many different challenges around the world. But for the enemy, like the Taliban, it's the only thing that matters. There's a saying among Afghans, America has the watches, but the Taliban has the time. I bet most Americans have never heard this. This just emphasizes that America does not know its enemy. When the U.S. intervened in Iraq, the soldiers didn't really understand the complexity of the local conflict, ethnic identities, or religion. Tierney was shocked in 2006 that at the height of the Iraq War, there were 1,000 Americans in the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, but only 6 spoke Arabic. As you can imagine, this type of ignorance would be deadly in these complex foreign conflicts. Tierney said the remarkable thing about the Taliban advance is that it didn't even use force, and that's because the Taliban made deals with the Afghan army. It has a far greater understanding of local networks and kin relationships. America could not have chosen a more challenging environment and was fighting what was basically an alien war. Afghanistan is a country of numerous tribes, languages, ethnicities, and religious sects. Tribal alliances in Afghanistan very often supersede national ones, or loyalties follow money and power. Part of the Taliban's strength lies in the fact that it belongs to the largest ethnic group in the country. Michael Sakia is a retired U.S. Marine who trained an Iraqi battalion during the Iraq War. He commented on the war in Afghanistan. We basically supported a hodgepodge of ethnic minorities who never had the capability of unifying the country. In addition to defeating the enemy, the terrorist, America has an extra mission of nation building. Washington and its NATO allies were attempting to turn Afghanistan into a unified democracy based largely on Western values. This model doesn't work. Sakia said there was a fundamental failure to understand what Afghans want. We did not understand the tribal dynamics. We never did. We think everybody wants what we have. It's cultural obtuseness, obliviousness to the reality of their lived experience. Many say, and we have reported on this, the Afghanistan government and its Afghan National Army are systematically corrupt. They had no effective command or control. Their troops were inflated. Much of their military equipment was taken apart, stolen, and sold off even to the Taliban. The Afghan army was essentially a dysfunctional force, and the government doesn't have the trust of the Afghan people. A research fellow for land warfare in London, Jack Watling, believes had the Taliban engaged in a full military onslaught and faced resistance, the collapse would have taken longer, but it would still have happened. The nature of the U.S. brokered ceasefire with the Taliban in early 2020 further weakened the Afghan government's legitimacy. The negotiation left out the leadership in Kabul when it already had little civilian respect. The nature of war has changed since World War II. America was facing an enemy that was far more committed than it was. Americans understand little about Afghanistan and were assisting a corrupt and disrespected government. These are all major things we need to consider when it comes to the 20-year war. But if America has failed its mission in Afghanistan, it was a failure of the political class, not the American soldiers. We have the utmost respect for every soldier that fought there, for their incredible sacrifice they made for America and Afghanistan. And that's it for today, my friends. Check out this playlist right here for more eye-opening content. To support us, please consider donating to the show or purchase a mug that matters. I would like to thank you all. Have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you next time.